Hi guys, and welcome to my channel. Today I'm making a very unusual dessert called Çak-Çak. Çak-Çak is a Tatar sweet. It is popular in Tatarstan and Bashkortostan and is recognized as a Tatarstan's national sweet in Russia. What is Çak-Çak? Çak-Çak is practically a fried up noodles, and that's homemade noodles, then binded together with the sweet syrup made with honey, sugar, and water. Today I'm gonna show you two different ways of cutting the noodles, but first we have to start with the dough, of course. For the dough, we're gonna need 5 large eggs. Crack the eggs in a large mixing bowl, and using the whisk, we're gonna whisk those until there are no traces of whites left in this mixture. It has to be very smooth, just like that. To the egg mixture, we're gonna add 1/4 of a teaspoon of baking powder and 1/4 of a teaspoon of salt, 1 tablespoon of heavy cream, and that's primarily for taste. You can use 1 tablespoon of powdered milk instead. Whisk it together. You will need somewhere between 450 grams to 500 grams of flour, also a whisk and a wooden spoon. And we're gonna start adding the flour to the egg mixture by 2 tablespoons at a time or 3 tablespoons at a time, and we're gonna whisk it. The reason it's done gradually so we don't get any lumps in this dough. So I'm gonna be watching the texture of this dough carefully because it is a soft dough, but it cannot be too tough and it cannot be too runny, otherwise you won't be able to form noodles out of it. So as soon as the dough starts getting thicker and thicker, we're gonna start mixing it with a wooden spoon and still adding more flour. And I will give you the total count for the flour I used, but in every household it's different depending on the size of the eggs you used and depending on the measurements you have in your country. So count approximately between 400 grams to 500 grams of flour that you need to make this dough. And when the dough becomes very thick and it's almost impossible to mix it with a spoon, we're gonna move on to our hands, and this will allow us to actually feel the dough and feel the texture of the dough, and it will let us know when to stop adding the flour. And the scraper can come very handy because you can scrape down all the bits of the flour and really get into it, into mixing this dough. And I think I have added pretty much 450 grams of flour, leaving just a little bit to form the noodles later on. But this to me looks like a perfect texture of the dough, so I'm gonna stop adding the flour and I'm gonna start kneading the dough. And you don't need to knead it for too long as it comes together and it has a smooth texture. As you can see, it's a very soft dough. We're gonna let it rest. And this is how much flour I have left, about 50 grams. We're gonna let it rest in a plastic bag for 30 minutes until we can start working with it. While our dough is resting, we're gonna line a baking tray with some paper towels to catch the extra oil after frying the noodles. And also we're gonna prepare another tray with just a drizzle of some flour on it so the noodles don't get stick together when we cut them. And we also gonna flour our table surface. If you're using silicone mat, that comes actually very handy, or you could just use the table surface, the countertop that you have at your home. We're gonna cut this dough in half, and each half we're gonna cut in quarters. Reserve the other half for another cake, since I told you I'm gonna be making 2 cakes out of this dough. And we're gonna start working with this half. We're gonna try to make long snakes, and it's not really fat snakes, so we need to make them skinny, almost the size of a shoelace, I would say. So that should take some practice, and it has to be really thin like this. And as soon as you get that thickness, we're gonna start cutting little pieces out of it and making it into balls, which is gonna be like a pea size, just like that. And it takes a long time, so no wonder this type of cutting the noodles usually used primarily for the weddings, because there's some help besides you just making it. There's gonna be like 20 women sitting at the table and making this little pea-sized balls out of this dough. So if you don't have any help, I will show you later how to make this cake with just not that much effort. And as you can see, all our pieces here, we're just gonna cover it with the flour so they don't stick. And before frying it, we need to actually shake that flour off. We're gonna be frying our noodles in small batches and fill up the pan with high borders, about an inch high, with the frying oil. And you can use either peanut oil, I'm using avocado oil, I know it's kind of pricey, or you can use canola oil, but most of these oils have aftertaste. In order to get rid of this aftertaste, I'm adding 2 tablespoons of clarified butter. This will enhance the taste of your noodles. And to test your oil if it's hot enough, you're just gonna drop 1 ball and see if it floats to the top, your oil is ready. So you're just gonna put your first batch of noodles, and you see how these guys they plump up, almost looking like popcorns, and dancing in the oil. And we need to fry them up to lightly brown color. You can leave them white like that, but I just like a little bit color to them, kind of like a beige color. And each batch you will be dropping onto the paper towel to catch an extra oil and continue on frying your noodles. Then we're gonna reserve this oil for our second cake, just adding a little bit more so it reaches up to the level. And look what your noodles look like. Kind of like pebbles. And as you can see, there's a lot of oil drippings on that paper towel. And we're gonna continue on making another cake, and I'm gonna show you a little bit easier way to cut these noodles, because the one that I showed you before is very time consuming. And if you don't have this time but you really want to enjoy this cake, so you can cut it this way. So each quarter we're gonna roll out to a very thin dough, probably kind of like a couple millimeters thin. Then we're gonna use the cutter and cut it into 2-inch strips, and each strip we're gonna cut with the scissors. And I find this method probably the most efficient. I tried to use the knife and it was just sticking to the knife, so just use the scissors. And we're gonna cut little noodles out of it about 1 inch long. And for the first cake, the pebble cake that I made, I'm also gonna, out of the last piece of dough, I'm gonna make a little decoration. I think it's gonna look pretty on top of it. So I'm just gonna cut 3 flowers like this. And the rest of it, we're just gonna cut into strips and then just make more noodles. But this is how you make a little rose out of this dough. You're gonna use a little bit of water to paste these pieces together, and then you need to secure it in the middle with something just for this rose to stay together. And here goes the noodles. And of course the noodles are gonna fry up faster for some reason, I don't know, maybe because they're thinner. And we're gonna fry up that rose, and watch this. It's magic, guys. This little piece of dough becomes a flower, a beautiful flower that we're gonna put on top of our pebble cake. And here we have 2 batches of these noodles. And to one, I'm gonna add 1 cup of walnuts and 1 cup of raisins, just to make it a little bit more interesting and different. And the other one I'm just gonna leave plain. Then we're gonna make a syrup, and the syrup is pretty simple. It's 200 grams of sugar, 250 grams of honey, and 80 milliliters of water. We're gonna use a small saucepan. We're gonna add our sugar and water, and we're gonna put it on the stove to boil. We're gonna mix it together, and as soon as it starts boiling process, we're gonna boil it for 3 minutes. We don't need to caramelize it. Our syrup is ready. You see how it drips off the spoon? It takes time to drip, so it's thick enough. So at this point, we're gonna add our honey and use a very good quality honey. I am using a dark honey because I think it has a little bit more flavor. Then we're gonna need to bring that honey to a boil, and you're gonna turn off the heat right away, so your syrup is ready. I have 2 forms here. One form which is a spring form for that cake with raisins and walnuts, and visually we're gonna divide our hot syrup into 2, and we're gonna use half for this cake. You're just gonna pour it onto the noodles. You're gonna mix it and then pour it again and mix it. And as soon as it doesn't look dry and all the noodles are covered with syrup, we're gonna stop. And we're gonna move on to our pebble cake. So this one is gonna take a little bit more syrup because it is a drier dough. And of course pour a little bit of a syrup on that decoration we made, and the second cake is ready. And I have about tablespoon left, so I'm just gonna pour it to that cake because it is slightly larger with us adding other things to it. So just mix it, and the key here, you need to form your cakes right away because that syrup is gonna set really fast. So just transfer all the dough into that spring form. We're gonna pat it down so it will unmold much easier if it's a little bit more firm. And it's ready. And the other one is gonna be tricky to mold because these little pebbles are just gonna stick to your hands like crazy. So I would suggest you have a little bit of water handy. You're gonna dip your hands into water, and then gonna grab the dough and form the cake, and this way it's not gonna stick to your hands. And I would wait a little bit till it's set just a little bit so you could form it into a dome. And that's how these cakes are formed. And they actually make them very high for the wedding. They make them like a 3-tier cakes with the large one on the bottom and the middle one and the small one. But we're just gonna do 1 tier today, and we're gonna put our rose on top, and we're just gonna decorate it with walnut halves, and it's gonna look so pretty. And it's gonna take a couple hours for these cakes to set, so I'm just gonna unmold it and show it to you what it looks like when it's unmolded. It's not completely set yet because it takes some time for the syrup to harden. We can decorate it with half walnuts, you can decorate it with raisins, you can decorate it with cherries, whatever you like. I'm a little bit impatient, so I'm just gonna cut a piece and show you what it looks like, but it's not completely set yet, so it still has to harden so these little noodles don't fall apart. But I will show you later what it's supposed to look like when it's completely set. But here you go. Almost looks like Rice Krispies, isn't it? It is a very delicious cake. It's not very sweet since we didn't use any sugar for the dough, and the only sugar you have is in the syrup. And here what it looks like when it's completely set. I hope you liked this video and this wonderful recipe. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you soon. Bye!